Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I am a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, and this is Pints with Aquinas. In this episode, I thought that we could address the perceived conflict between reason and faith. A lot of folks who are opposed to religious claims, who are distrustful of religious claims, will say, listen, reason gives us everything that we need. Religion is made up, all right? At best, it's an illusion. At worst, it's a genuine stumbling block to human progress. So keep your religious claims out of this conversation because you're just trying to deny reason or to obscure reason or to otherwise complexify the account that we have access to by virtue of reason. But within the Catholic intellectual tradition, we would argue for a real harmony or a confluence of faith and reason. So it is to that theme that we will turn. All right, so in order to begin the conversation, it's helpful to have a sense of what we're looking into. And at the end of the day, we're looking into reality. There's a thing that exists. That thing is outside of us. And we, as knowers and lovers, are inquiring into that thing so we can have a better appreciation of that thing, so we can know it and love it. Because ultimately, we are part of a kind of ecosystematic harmony in the universe, and we're seeking to find our place within it so that we can abide in the truth. Because only the truth has grace, in the sense that there's no sense of building a life upon a falsity. We want to build our life upon a truth, upon what is in fact, so that way we can abide there. Because if we're constantly in conflict by virtue of the fact that we're living a falsity, then we're never going to find real peace. We're never going to find real enjoyment. We're never going to find real happiness. So there's a reality out there that confronts us, that addresses itself to us. And by virtue of the fact that we have a mind and a heart, we can engage with that reality in a very dignified or elevated manner as beings made to the image and likeness of God. So we're looking around here at reality. We discover different things. You might have rocks or plants or animals or, other human beings or angels. And we begin to inquire into those things. And there's a kind of intelligibility in that inquiry because we're addressing ourselves to things that are stably constituted. It's not like, there's all this flux, there's all this change out here. How can I ever know what is and what isn't? Well, it's like you got rocks and you got plants, you got animals, you got other human beings, you got angels. And those things are constituted by natures. Natures are a principle of identity and destiny, and so we can reason upon them and have a modicum of certainty when it comes to knowing the truth about them and then engaging with them profitably. So we have access to reality. We want to affirm that at the very outset because I think a lot of people are made nervous by that claim, and so they tend to push back against that claim because they think when somebody makes a claim to have access to reality, then they're going to use that claim to bash me over the head with it. They're going to make dogmatic claims and then subsequently try to rule out, other viewpoints or other perspectives. Whereas I don't think that we want to just devolve into relativism if what we want in the end is tolerance or what we want in the end is religious liberty. Okay, so we're trying to defend this notion that we have real access to reality because our minds and our hearts are made for that access and things present themselves to be accessed. They are intelligible, we're intellectual. That's a great little pairing that we've got going on here. So when we're hosting this conversation, we're seeking metaphysical answers. We want to know what is. We want to get down to the nitty-gritty. We want to get down to the very thusness and thatness and whatness of things, all right? Whereas I think a lot of people in the secular world, in the present day and age, they're not so much concerned with what is. They want to tell a story about how a thing came to be, or they want to evaluate how a thing makes them feel. But those aren't satisfactory answers. We want something more significant. So let's get after it. Let's get after the reality. Now, when we talk about reason, we're talking about a particular approach to reality, all right? So we as human beings are made on the way. We're not made at the end. And we proceed towards our end by a series of many steps, all right? So we're constantly, progressing, growing, advancing, as it were, towards our end. And in that process, we are perfected by our engagement with reality. Because reality has many good things, perfect things, which when we assimilate them or when we interact with them, they build us up as human beings and bring us to our fullness, right? By grace and virtue and certain gifts and thus, that, and the other thing, okay? So we're seeking to be yet more perfectly on the way so that we attain to our end, and when we come there, we are worthy of the end, all right? We are capable of bearing the end. And we're made open to this reality, and in a certain sense, we're made especially open to this reality by virtue of the fact, again, that we have a mind with which to know and a heart with which to love, which is to say, we are made to the image and likeness of God. So this kind of, what would you say, this character of our nature flows from who we are, all right? Because we are human beings made in this particular way. We have this kind of openness, and we are perfected in exercising this openness better and better with each passing day. All right? So we have a body and a soul. We are embodied souls or ensouled bodies, depending on how you want to describe it. St. Thomas describes us as the horizon of creation, the meeting point of heaven and earth, where spirit and matter touch and embrace, okay? So as we proceed towards this end, we're going to do it in a way that is peculiar of us as human beings, all right? So the soul is engaging through the body with reality, all right? And so whether it's intellect or will or the different passions, we're always kind of reaching out to seek the good, to seek our perfection so that we can grow in conversation with it. So the soul is interacting through means of different powers, which we've called, intellect, will, and passions. And when we talk about reason, we're talking about this particular mode, all right? This particular mode of being on the way towards the end, seeking goods, seeking perfections, and doing so in a way that is true of us as human beings, all right? And in this process of intellection, this process of exercising our reason, we observe three basic steps. There's apprehension, where the thing out there takes up a kind of residence in here. I abstract from its peculiar instantiation, all right? I abstract from its concrete particulars and come to a notion of what it is in itself, all right? So I have, let's see, I'm looking at a table right here, all right? And this table is this tall and this wide, and it's made of this material and thus and such. There's all these particulars about it. But based on this encounter, based on this experience, I can abstract from those particularities and come to a notion of tableness. And then I use that notion of tableness to engage with other instances of tables. And then I pass to the second act of the intellect, which is judgment. So I can say, like, this table is taller than that table, or this table is, like made of a darker wood, and things like that. So I'm composing and dividing. I'm making certain judgments. And based on these judgments, I reason. So I refine those judgments, and I come to a yet better and better appreciation of reality through my experience of it, but also by my reasoning upon it. And as a result, my mind comes to reflect what is. My mind is conformed to reality, and that's just what we mean by truth, an adequation of the mind to the thing, such that we are made in the image of the reality, so that we are made to reflect the reality in a way that actually corresponds. Because, again, only the truth has grace. Only the truth begets in us a real liberty and a real, what would you say, a real facility in attaining to our end. Now, it's in this conversation that we can situate science, all right? Because science, as it is practiced, presently, is a particular methodology for prosecuting this process of reasoning, okay? So you have a formal object where you say, I'm going to consider reality under this particular aspect, either as living, with biology, or as constituted of certain chemical, components in chemistry, or as mobile, right, in the sense of physics. And then I'm going to evaluate certain empirical data based on experimentation according to, a particular methodology for prosecuting the process of reasoning, all right? And oftentimes science is motivated by, like certain paradigms of either verifiability or falsifiability. I want to do experiments such that they can be repeated because I want to have a certainty about those results. And then I want to typically use those results for improving the state of man, whether by technological process or medical yields or things like that. That's not necessarily entailed by science, but oftentimes science is deployed for such ends. So science is a particular dimension of our reasoning. It covers certain phenomena, but it doesn't cover all phenomena, okay? So I think that we're sensitive to that fact, right? It doesn't eliminate like the need for philosophy, for metaphysics, for instance, okay? It's one aspect of the way in which we inquire into reality such that we can be perfected by that reality and be in fruitful dialogue with that reality. But, and here we come to our final point, in any engagement that we conduct, all right, we're going to find that there are certain limits to our knowledge, certain limits to our ability to verify or to falsify or to gain access, all right? And one limit that we often encounter is that the thing that I want to know is not personally or, what would you say, presently. It's not personally or presently verifiable. So I personally can't get after it, or in my present circumstances, I can't get after it. And yet, it's still good for me to know it. So for instance, like when you check the weather, say you're going on vacation in 2 days to a place that's a few hours away, you want to know what the weather's going to be like. Well, you can't transport yourself physically and temporally to that place in that time in order to verify what the weather is going to be like. Now, mind you, you could use other ways by which to get after that knowledge conjecturally. If you have a facility with meteorological sciences and you can read Doppler radars, or you like go up in the clouds and do whatever you do, right? But we find it much more easy just to trust the meteorologists, to trust those who are competent in sharing with us the conjectures that they have made based on, pretty good science here in the 21st century. All right, and when we do this, what we're gaining access to is a kind of knowledge by testimony. In this case, it's something in the future, but oftentimes it's something in the past. Like when you look at a map, for instance, you yourself don't necessarily have to verify that Moscow is where it says it is, or that St. Petersburg is however many kilometers away, okay? You can trust that the Guild of Cartographers is honest in the practice of their craft and relying upon satellite imaging and surveyors and any number of subordinated sciences. They're going to plot the points as the points ought to be plotted so that you can rely upon them to convey that knowledge, all right? So you're basing your judgment on their authority, which is a kind of blend of their competence and of their testimony. That's just a natural faith. So without even getting into supernatural faith, right, we recognize that there are limits to our knowledge, and in order to overcome those limits, in order to live a good, happy, well-adjusted human life, we need to acknowledge those limits and then benefit from the testimony of the human community so that we can get access to the types of things which help us to live our human lives. All right? But when we're talking about faith now, we're talking about something that not only can I not verify it personally or like presently, right? But there's no human being on earth who can verify it personally or presently. Because when it comes to supernatural faith, we're talking about God and all things in light of God. We're talking about our supernatural destiny, the life of heaven. We're talking about grace. We're talking about all kinds of invisible things which I cannot verify personally or presently, and you cannot verify personally or presently. And yet, there is an urgency, right, regarding our knowledge of these things, our love of these things, because our very supernatural destiny, suppositionally speaking, for those of you who are critical of these types of claims, or for those of you who are still skeptical, our supernatural destiny depends on our knowledge and love of those things. Here you can think like Pascal's wager, like if it is, it seems like it's important, okay? But in this case, we do have testimony from one who is most reliable, namely from God himself. And in the case of the Christian dispensation, from the only begotten Son of God who takes human flesh so as to make yet more firm our faith, our hope, and our love, by virtue of his testimony, which is most excellent and compelling. All right? So supernatural faith, it attains to a kind of reasonableness or a kind of rationality in light of the fact that it's speaking of things which we don't otherwise have access to, but upon which our life depends in a very, very significant way. All right? This doesn't mean that it entails necessarily a leap of blind faith, that reason, once you get into this zone, has no exercise or has no proper competence, because that's just not true. We continue to exercise our reasons, both in making arguments like this and showing how it is reasonable, right, to find a space for faith in one's life. But also beyond that, like there are things which are revealed in faith that we can prove, like that God exists and that he is simple and that he is perfect and that he is good and that he is one and that he is eternal and that he is immutable and that he is infinite and that he is omnipresent and that he is provident. We can prove those things. They're called the preambles of the faith. And so they kind of bear out the claims of supernatural faith, okay? Or what are sometimes called signs of credibility, okay? The fact that all of this prophecy kind of coalesces in our Lord Jesus Christ, that's astonishing. Or all of these miracles that are testified to, astonishing. The fact that you have the church teaching the same things over the course of 2 millennia and not reforming its teaching, but only developing its teaching, that's astonishing. Or the fact that you have all of these saints who testify to the riches of grace at work in the life of the church. Okay, they all point back to this religious claim, to this supernatural faith, and seem to indicate that there's something going on here, something that merits our further inquiry. So that's the second, signs of credibility. Third is we can show how religious claims illumine our human condition. They bear out our human condition. And fourth, we can actually inquire into the revealed doctrines themselves to show they're not contradictory and to show that, the arguments or the objections of others don't hold water. All right, so we continue to use our reason within the context of the life of supernatural faith. But effectively, we're insisting upon the harmony. We're insisting upon the confluence of faith and reason because By these, we are inquiring to the one reality. We're seeking to know reality yet more perfectly and perfectly. And it's foolish to cut ourselves off from supernatural faith on the count of the fact that we can't prove it in the same way that we prove other things like, I don't know, certain theories in mathematics or certain postulates, whatever, in, like logic, things of that sort, right? It would be foolish to cut ourselves off from that on account of the fact that it's a different type of claim, because a different type of object, namely an invisible object, demands of us a different type of entry or a different type of virtue whereby to access it. And so we rely on testimony. In the case of natural faith, that'd be natural testimony. But in the case of supernatural faith, that's a kind of supernatural testimony from the one person who is competent to speak excellently and completely about these things which we await in the end of the age and begin to experience now. And that is God. And specifically in the Christian dispensation, that is our Lord Jesus Christ, who takes human flesh and goes to show that it is by faith and reason, as if by two wings, that we mount up to the contemplation of truth and gain access to the reality, in which conversation we ourselves are saved. So it's with this, this recognition that only the truth bears grace, that only the truth has grace, that we would say, not only is it, not unreasonable to believe, but it is in fact reasonable to believe. So, it's in that sense that I think that we can defend in a really, really thoroughgoing manner that there is no conflict, but there is in fact a deep harmony between faith and reason. Boom. That is what I wanted to say. So thanks for listening. This is Pints with Aquinas. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel, push the bell, and get email updates when further things come from the channel, from which you will no doubt benefit. Also, I contribute to a podcast with 4 other Dominican friars. It is called Godsplaining. There's great things coming from that channel. You can check it out on YouTube or on any podcast app. Also, I'd recommend that you go to godsplaining.org and check out the retreats that we have this summer in July and August. So applications still available, though the places are filling up. So do that yesterday rather than now. Do it now rather than tomorrow. You get it. And then the last thing is I wrote a book. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. And so far people have been reading it and have had some cool things to say. So I'm pumped, I'm jazzed that those of you who have begun to read have benefited. But I hope that more may in fact do the same. So check it out if you haven't yet. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly. That's all I got. All right, my prayers are for you. Please pray for me, and I will catch you next time on Pints with Aquinas.